Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jennifer Gunn, and I'm the director of the Institute for Advanced Study, and I want to welcome you to IAS Thursday. But before we begin, I want to acknowledge that wherever you are joining us from today, we are all located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. The University of Minnesota's Twin Cities campus resides on Dakota land ceded in the treaties of 1837 and 1851. The Institute for Advanced Study acknowledges that this place has a complex and layered history, and a land acknowledgement is one of the ways in which we work to educate the campus and community about this land and our relationships with it and with each other. The IAS is committed to ongoing efforts to recognize, support, and advocate for American Indian nations and peoples. I want to make some announcements first, and then I will give you the eternal Zoom instructions. So next week's IAS Thursday program is the October Spotlight Series on the military and the role of citizen soldiers. We have just announced a new IAS Thursday program for October 21st, Decarcerating Disability, Deinstitutionalization, Disability Justice, and Prison Abolition. And I hope you'll join us for that as well. 2 deadlines are coming up for traditional IAS programs. The faculty fellowship applications will be due November 8th at noon, and the interdisciplinary doctoral fellowship applications are due on Monday, October 18th. For more information on either of these, consult the IAS website. And if you'd like to receive information and reminders, please join the IAS newsletter. You can check the chat for the link to sign up or go to the IAS website. All right, now for the Zoom instructions. I know you're all excited. We do have live transcription available today, and to enable that option, click on the live transcript button on the bottom bar of your computer of the Zoom menu bar, and then click on Show Subtitles. If you're on a phone or mobile device, this may be in the upper right-hand corner instead. We will have time for our audience questions at the end of the event. And if you have questions for our speakers at any time during today's presentation, you can enter them through Zoom's Q&A feature, which is also located on the Zoom menu bar. And this is a Zoom webinar, so we really ask that you enter the questions in the Q&A, because that's where the speakers and the moderator will be looking for the questions. It's hard to, you can't cut and paste them from chat to the Q&A. If you want to introduce yourselves, share resources, or chat with one another during the event, then please do use the chat feature and make sure that you're selecting all panelists and attendees when you send your message. Okay, so now we get to the good part. Today's conversation is based on a decade-long collaboration between Queen Quet, Chieftess and head of state of the GullahGeecheee Nation, and Dr. Kate Derickson, faculty in Geography, Environment, and Society, and co-director of the CREATE project here at the University of Minnesota. Queen Quet and Professor Derickson are the co-conveners of the Cultural Colloquium of Collaboration, which is an IAS research and creative collaborative, and their collaborative is co-sponsor of our conversation today. So thank you to the collaborative. It is now my pleasure to introduce Queen Quet. Queen Quet is a published author, computer scientist, lecturer, mathematician, historian, columnist, preservationist, environmental justice advocate, environmentalist, film consultant, and the archivist. And she is founder of the premier advocacy organization for the continuation of Gullah Geechee culture, the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition. I think we call her a polymath. Queen Quet has not only provided histo-musical presentations throughout the world, but was also the first Gullah Geechee person to speak on behalf of her people before the United Nations. Queen Quet was one of the first of 7 inductees in the Gullah Geechee Nation Hall of Fame. She received the Anointed Spirit Award for being a visionary and for her leadership. And I believe she has a new award, the Palmetto Award, from the governor of South Carolina. So without further ado, Queen Quet.
Beneath this storm so long, beneath this your storm so long, crying, Lord, Lord, give we more time for pride. I've been in this your storm so long. Oh, this your needed time. Oh, this your needed time. Crying, Lord, Lord, give we more time for prize. I've been in this your storm so long. This your day. We want to children forget upon this your show. All right, y'all, in the GullahGeecheee Nation. WEBE, yeah, upon this your land in the sea. Yeah, from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. Who know what the yeti we the crack we teach so and things like that. Or some say, or that like why so fast and thing like that. With that tide look like a kind of slow. Or but plenty of time. That is the thing. What broke up what we had. Whenever that with them big you. And I broke with them come in and say, no upon this. Oh, but then over there, something come again and say, oh no, well, we're glad that I did it. Because then they could come down from the paper and then say, well, then figure they would say, discover, but then I crack your teeth with we. And even if they crack with teeth and yeti, they can't understand we. Then say, so they start for Goodwine, the other rest of we. When them keep whining, yeah, all the days. But them not do this your thing. What we are for do now, you see, for really truly crack your teeth with and yeti, who we be, that we be, Gullah Geechee, anointed people. So for our children what they yonder, way across from we, in that Midwestern country, we could crack with teeth the way Hunter do them over there. So I'll talk with you like this so you can understand what I have to say. As Queen Quet, Chieftess, and as we say, head on the body, the head of state for the Gullah Geechee Nation, I'm so proud to be back here amongst what I consider my University of Minnesota family. As a Winton chair, I really got to be a part of drawing people into a circle the way that we do here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, and having you sit down a little while underneath a virtual oak tree. You see, we'll say, Terry Lee Wild would be. And so that we could talk to one another in a way that we could really articulate who we are as a cultural group. Well, I know that's unusual to most university people because we're usually considered subjects, or as I look at it as a scientist, objects of study, where you actually decide, well, you heard something about us, or you saw a movie, you heard from someone chit-chatting, found us intriguing. You wanted to discover whether this was legend or truth, whether this group of people actually exist, whether these islands actually exist, because many mainlanders in the US have no idea that there are sea islands from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, much less that whole region actually stretches to the St. Johns River. And that therein is where you'll find us, the GullahGeechee Nation. So for generation after generation, from the Yemisi to the Kusabu, to the Adisto, to the Cree, all the indigenous ancestors that are part of my ancestral legacy, as well as the Africans that were then brought into this region. From their time forward, from the 1500s and on to today, many people have come in and heard our language and discounted it, didn't speak to us, but wrote about us, especially if they thought they had the academic expertise to do so. So today, as we really launch this cultural colloquium here that we're going to have, I thought I'd do what we ought to do academically and make sure that when we talk about a cultural colloquium of collaboration, that triple C actually fits in for you and for me, and that we all realize that we're talking about two different types of forms of communication and legacy. So I know that over the time that we've had the Gullah Geechee Alkebulan archive, that many of our collaborators at University of Minnesota, starting with Dr. Kate Derickson, have helped us to contribute to in various ways, that we started to discover some language that you all have that doesn't mean the same thing to us in our community at all. And that language is the reason we're sitting in this space. There's this little word. That word is called case. Now, some of you who like R&B like me, y'all remember that's a good singer too, right? Well, I'd rather we be singing to get us all through. But the situation is such that we need to dialogue first about this word that we're here to, for me, celebrate, to be a part of, to gather in the circle and connect to, is what is colloquia? What is colloquium? Where does it derive from? It actually has its origins in to talk to, a talk with. And nowadays, I know if you're like me and you fit into this new category they call BIPOC, you're tired of the word conversation. Conversation is very different than collaboration. And conversation can't lead to collaboration unless there is clear communication and things are not lost in your interpretation. So this is a critical moment for us to just examine that word, case. It's the case that we are all here in this unique space. But when you come in what others call a BIPOC community now, and you hear, I don't want to catch a case, that has multiple meanings now for me, because we have become people's case studies, case work. We've caught cases and we did no violations. But that's not unusual to people that look like me, you see, because of the way there has been a negative interpretation of our very existence in so-called American society. People tend to think from the Western world that they need to come into indigenous communities, Black communities, brown communities, and tell us what's best for us. And that happened all too often in the Gullah Geechee Nation. That's why I'm able to articulate in the manner that I do today when I'm speaking English. But thank to God that I can still throw them down like a dish if I need for crack the teeth, and all the rest of the people were there. And so it's a good thing that I am still bilingual, that I literally didn't allow the language to get beaten out of me. But the soul gets beaten down in today's world where everyone wants to simply have a conversation about inequity, a conversation about injustice, a conversation that we now call, and we pocket it all together, Jedi. We have to do more than simply talk. at one another. We have to commune in the circle together. And that's when we know we are entering the arena of collaboration. So this colloquium is cultural in that regard, because we are going to take up space where others have simply made us a case. And so it's been really intriguing for the last decade to communicate more with folks within academia through the Gullah Geechee Sustainability Think Tank, and to really see how they think versus who we be as Gullah Geechees. From that emerged this book, WEBE Gullah Geechee, which is Cultural Capital and a Collaboration Anthology. This will now effectively be called Volume 1, because by the end of our Cultural Colloquium of Collaboration, we intend to have another volume published to help people get some guidelines on research in the Gullah Geechee Nation, what's respectful to do and what's not respectful to do, and recognizing that the experts are those whose culture you've come to learn about, to write about, to do death by PowerPoint about. But how would you know who we are if we don't tell you? You have to be willing to enter the circle with us and sit and sometimes not say a word. Tune in. Let your spirit receive it, because maybe you've never been a part of a conversation or talk like this one before. So if I've been a trauma down like I did chef for all the shit that we did and the suckle and thing like that, they blend on it, you know, the left out there just like on to become anything. You wouldn't know anything when you left if you couldn't interpret what I said. So maybe your language also needs some interpretation, and that may need to be done by those same individuals that you are thinking you are studying. And now you're causing us to catch a case because you're in the wrong place. We're not in a Peachtree dish. We're living beings. We have our own story to tell. And maybe instead of interpreting it, maybe you should take dictation. Maybe you should simply go back with quotations that came from our voices. We have so many devices on which you can do that now. There's no excuse to say you didn't get it all right. It's not a WPA interview. We are in the present day where people record almost everything. But is that appropriate for you to do? You need to ask. What do you call it today? Informed consent is required. And people never thought of that. When they decided, they would formulate their abstracts and their thesis papers to say, we're going to study this particular group. So it was, as one might say, a breath of fresh air. I might say a breath of Sea Island salt air to meet Dr. Kate Derickson and find out she's a geographer that has something that I love so much, common sense. And I know Voltaire says common sense is not so common. And on Saturday past, I met a brother named Voltaire, and I shared that with him, that I quote his name often. And now I can say that we even have a Voltaire right here where I be, in this land of the Gullah Geechee. So it was a blessing to meet him, as has been this a blessed journey with all of the Gullah Geechee Sustainability Think Tank members, including my often called co-collaborator, sometimes called co-conspirator, sometimes called co-professor, Dr. Kate Derickson. And I always say, my geographer. I have a couple of them now, I'm so proud to say, and they let me know, yes, you're going to need a lot of us. And so we have been plotting in that way on what to map out as we bring you into this circle of our cultural colloquium, you see. And now I asked Dr. Derickson to talk a little bit about collaboration and this word case that seems to be just all over the place.
Well, thank you, Queen Quet, for that. It's really nice to be here. Thanks to the IAS for the opportunity and for continuing to invest in this almost 10-year long collaboration. And I know it's almost 10 years long because it's, as Queen mentioned, taken me 10 years to write the paper that is forthcoming about this collaboration. And I'm going to share some of what I have written in that paper in some of these comments. And you'll have to, there's kind of my household unfolding behind me because my internet's a little unstable. So apologies if dog barking gets in the background. So, you know, people are often really surprised in both Minnesota and in South Carolina when I describe my work as a member of the GullahGeechee Sustainability Think Tank. What's the Minnesota connection is one of the first things that people ask. Why would a professor in Minnesota be coming to South Carolina? Or why am I not doing this work in my own backyard? And this reaction always surprises me a little bit, and it strikes me as a little bit odd, in part because I don't think that my colleagues who do international work are met with the same degree of confusion about, you know, why they're here and why they're doing work there. So it always raises a question for me about the imagined scales of belonging, about regional identities, and about the subtle but persistent set of assumptions about the politics of knowledge production. What does it mean to do work here versus doing work out there? And I'm attentive to these inquiries, both from those in South Carolina and those here in Minnesota, because I'm interested in understanding what it means to be in an ethical relationship of scholarly knowledge production. So as a geographer, I'm interested in the relationships between places and how we understand them and how those understandings shape what we do. And so I was especially interested to learn from Hannah Jo, who's one of the panelists today, about the work of St. Cloud State historian Christopher Lehman that uncovered the fact that the University of Minnesota does in fact have a direct historical connection to the GullahGeechee people, one that makes the resourcing of their community struggle for self-determination all the more urgent. So in the mid-1800s, the U received a major gift from the former governor of South Carolina, who made his wealth as a slaveholder in Geechee, which is in GullahGeechee Nation. And his gift was never paid back, and today is worth at least $750,000 in real dollars. So I don't think we need these explicit links to think about our ethical obligation to other places and the relational nature of place. What is Minnesota in relation to South Carolina? We do not need that. We do not need to know that in order to think through these things, but it's provocative though it is to know. We simply have to know that these relationships and dynamics do exist and could exist. So for the past 8 years, I've been a member of the GullahGeechee Sustainability Think Tank. And throughout this collaboration, I've approached the collaboration with an ethos of what I call resourcefulness as an approach to community engaged research. So resourcefulness aims to turn the research university inside out, to mobilize the resources of the research university, to ask and answer questions that are a priority to those that have not historically had the access to shape our research agendas. Certainly plenty of research has been done about GullahGeechees, as Queen Quet pointed out, but I'm interested in thinking through what does it mean to do research for GullahGeechees. And I think that distinction is what we've been trying to figure out on the GullahGeechee Sustainability Think Tank and trying to put into practice. And I want to drop into the chat. I thought about scrolling through these story maps, but instead I want to put the links to them in the chat because they're a little bit, story map is imperfect and they're a little bit slow to load. And so I thought people could look at them on their own as I talk. So I've been thinking a lot, as Queen Quet said, about this idea of a case and what does it mean to become a case or to not become a case. And, you know, what I've come to realize in my work with the GullahGeechee Sustainability Think Tank is that not everything, as it turns out, is a knowledge problem. So everything can be studied, everything can be made the object of curiosity. And as my time as a journal editor has taught me, nearly everything can become a case. And when constructed effectively, of course, the case not only illustrates how a given process plays out in a particular place and time, it positions the knower to tinker with the very framework itself, to affirm some elements, to challenge others. And these cases bring into relief theories of causation and change. The findings in cases speak back to, disrupt, and inform our theoretical frameworks. But what of the case itself? So what are the residues that are made in the wake of becoming a quote unquote case? And this is a question that I've been trying to think through with the work of people like Kirsty Dotson, who's a feminist philosopher, and Catherine McKittrick, who is a geographer, to think about what happens when we render a place or a people a case. And I've been concerned about what Kirsty Dotson talks about as this notion of epistemically backgrounding. So when we know about, but when we don't know for, the risk that we run of diminishing the epistemic confidence in the people about which we purport to know. And so much of my work as a member of the GullahGeechee Sustainability think tank, much of my work as a collaborator and co-conspirator with Queen Quet is to think about how to refuse that process and instead to know with and to know for in certain cases, but to resist this impulse to know about. And that impulse and push is strong, not only because I have a PhD in geography, which is a discipline that has a colonial, past and present, and because I'm trained in this intellectual tradition, but also I find all around me being pushed to be the expert, being asked to be the expert. And people will even ask me to come speak about Gullah Geechee people. And I'll say, well, I think you should reach out to Queen Quet. And they'll say, we tried, we couldn't get in touch with her. And if anyone's ever tried to email Queen Quet, that's not true because she always gets back to you. So I think it's really interesting how not only my own drive to know about, but the drive that comes from the externally kind of motivated drive to be a representative of somebody who knows about. And so what I've tried to do in my work is to think more carefully about what we consider to, in fact, be a knowledge problem. What claims, what processes, what subjectivities do we subject to scholarly scrutiny? And more to the point, why? Why do we do it? In my own work with Gullah Geechee people, they've told me over and over again, a series of things that they know to be true. And as I've thought about what do I do with this information as in a scholarly register, I've been struck by what I think I was trained to do, which is pursue what I've called a quote unquote itinerary of verification, which is to go out and prove that what they've said to be true is in fact true. But I've stopped short of doing that because I'm concerned about the way in which I'm concerned about two things. One, the way in which that move might diminish the epistemic confidence in the people about whom I understand myself to be in solidarity. So if I go out and pursue this itinerary of verification, do I diminish people's epistemic confidence in Gullah Geechee people themselves who are telling us what they know to be true? But I'm also really curious about the theoretical underpinning or the theory of causation that assumes that if I know something and I tell you that it's true, that it will change. So I've been wondering, what could I see and tell other academics that I'd seen that would make anything change? And wondering about what theories of power and theories of change we're tacitly mobilizing if when we proceed as though uncovering something or revealing how something works in a scholarly register would make it otherwise. And then finally, I'm really concerned about the power relations reproduced in that verification process. And I call that the social relations engendered in the act of knowing. And so what I've been arguing for is a kind of diminished and more specific role for scholarly knowledge production in these kind of broader struggles for self-determination. So, for my Gullah Geechee collaborators, the political horizon is self-determination. And in relation to that horizon, there are proper knowledge problems, things about which they do not know and about which they would like to know more. But there's a really wide gulf I've found between that which my discipline considers to be a knowledge problem and that about which my collaborators want to know. know. And my contention is that prioritizing the disciplinary curiosities comes at the cost of what Dodson calls this epistemic confidence, that becoming a case is likely to be antithetical to GullahGeechee self-determination. And I do not believe this this gulf is unbridgeable. I think it's possible to identify questions that advance our disciplinary conversations in a scholarly way and do not undermine the epistemic confidence of those that make up the so-called case. So I'm not making an argument against scholarly forms of knowing, or that we should merely amplify political claims as though they are scholarly knowledge, but I'm arguing for a rigorous and diminished role for scholarly knowledge production in the collective struggle for liberation. And so, you know, what we have found through the CREATE initiative, which is partnered with Geechee Nation, through my co-teaching with Queen Quet, through all the opportunities that we've had for graduate students to get involved in this work, is that there's an enormous role for scholarly research here. And I've also found this in my time as a member of the think tank. We have done research on land tenure and the kind of pros and cons of selling land or holding it in different ways. We've done research on the impact, the environmental and economic impact of stormwater retention ponds. Collaborators and members of the GullahGeechee Sustainability Think Tank have done work on lupus, have done work on the content of fish, of, you know, climate change, heat indexes, and increasing temperatures and the impact that that might have on places. But the difference is we have studied these processes that are interesting and important and a priority to GullahGeechee people, but we're not studying GullahGeechee people to tell them more about themselves. And so, you know, I'm going to hand it over to our two graduate student panelists so that they can talk a little bit more about what that experience has been like from the graduate student side, and maybe reflect on as they're kind of figuring out what kind of academic they want to be. You know, these are the questions that I've been mulling over for 10 years and are now in this paper that's forthcoming. So let me start out by first introducing Mariah Schumpert, who is a PhD student in gender, women, and sexuality studies here at the University of Minnesota. And they were a student in the class that Queen Quet and I co-taught last semester, and one of the authors of the story map, that's the St. Helena GullahGeechee.com story map. And so, yeah, I'll hand it over to you now, Mariah.
Thanks so much, Kate and Queen, for those introductions and for those really thoughtful remarks about collaboration and the work that there is to be done with in collaboration with GullahGeechee peoples and their communities. So as Kate mentioned, I'm a graduate student in gender, women, and sexuality studies. And I became a part of this collaboration through a research methods course that was offered last year in collaboration with Queen Quet. And through that course, what we did as graduate students was to work with Queen Quet and to review a body of literature that she and Dr. Derickson had organized for us in preparation for a collaborative story map project. And so over the course of the semester, we had an opportunity to read collectively and engage in a conversation about the materials that we were reading about GullahGeechee people. Most of the material was actually written by GullahGeechee people, which was a really exciting opportunity to engage with the ways in which GullahGeechees are telling their own stories and producing their own knowledges of place and culture. And so over the course of the semester, we came up with a project to do this story map. And each of us were tasked with writing a different portion of the narrative that now flows through the entirety of the map. And so my first came in the form of writing the land acknowledgement portion and the entitled Honoring Indigeneity in the story map. And so that really gave me an opportunity to look at the knowledges that we had read in the class and consolidate some information about the original inhabitants of St. Helena Island and their connection to Gullah Geechee peoples throughout history and today. And then I also worked on consolidating some of the histories that we read about fraternal orders on St. Helena Island. And then as we progressed through organizing first the narrative of the story map and then got into the mechanics of actually building out the story map, I took on the role of doing some like editorial oversight of all of the narrative that we had generated collectively. And that work really looked like reading and editing for voice in the story map. And so one of the things that really became a major thread in our conversations over the course of the semester was thinking about how to tell the story of St. Helena Island in a way that emphasized Gullah Geechee agency. And we wanted to do that in a way that emphasized that Gullah Geechee people are not a passive people throughout the stories that we wanted to tell about the histories of that place. So throughout histories of enslavement, resistance in St. Helena Island, and the broader cultural corridor, and as well as documenting and detailing Reconstruction, as well as migration out of the Gullah Geechee Nation. And so my primary interest was really thinking about how I can emphasize the ongoing presence of Gullah Geechee people through some editorial, some editorial changes or adjustments in the narrative so that it reads more coherently and it's got a consistent voice throughout. In terms of collaboration, I think as a student, one of the things that was really exciting to me was to have an opportunity to engage many of the questions that Dr. Derickson just raised in her remarks about how we can really approach collaboration ethically and to disrupt some of the power dynamics that are normally reproduced when academics collaborate with communities as well as cultural workers. And so I was really excited that the work that I was doing in our class would have an immediate impact. And so it really sort of triggered in a, I guess like a motivation in a way that I rarely get in a graduate seminar for a final project. So we had this really timely goal. We had a timeline, and through that project, we were actually able to find roles for everyone. So I really enjoyed that through our collaboration. We had scholars from a bunch of different departments. And so we had an opportunity to actually think through the mechanics of collaboration in real time with the oversight of Kate as our professor and the guidance from Queen Quet. And it was just a really beautiful opportunity to see as a gender and sexuality scholar that thinks a lot about race, I tend to work primarily in narrative forms. And so to have folks from other departments who might work more with different kinds of data, integrate all these different forms of relaying information about Gullah Geechee community in a way that immediately has an impact. So those are the things that I wanted to highlight about my participation in the collaboration. And I want to also invite my colleague and collaborator, Hannah Jo, to join in and maybe talk a little bit about the role that you took in our collaboration.
Hi, everybody. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having us here. And I feel like I was taking a lot of notes from my fellow panelists because I'm learning a lot and just helping me to reflect again on our experiences and our collaboration. So yeah, I'm Hannah Jo. I use she or they pronouns. I'm a third year PhD student in the Natural Resource Science and Management program. And I was a part of the course that we've been talking about this afternoon, and also was a Create Fellow, and had the chance to work with Representative Glenda Simmons Jenkins and Queen Quet that summer. So in the Nassau County, Florida context, in a St. Helena context. I think what I would like to share, so much wonderful insights have been shared already. And I think what I'll speak to is a little bit of, I guess, my journey as a student and kind of how the collaboration with the GullahGeecheee Nation has fit into that and assisted me in my journey. I really appreciate what Queen Quet said in your opening about colloquium, and also this idea of collaboration is more than conversation. And I think you used the words of drawing us into a circle and sitting beneath a virtual oak tree. I wrote that down because I really liked it. And I think, our course for me really was that. I actually came back into this room today. You might notice this is the room I always sat in during our class, which is my bedroom. And I don't take many Zoom calls from here, but it's a very comfortable space for me. I love the flowers, and I often would light incense before our classes, and I did that again today. And I created kind of my own, ritual for our classes because it was a special place to be able to come and know that when I come into this space, almost always Queen Quet would open with a song. You would speak your language with us. You are the expert of Gullah Geechee culture, and that was never questioned. I think you said towards the end of the class that you said I was pretty quiet during class, and I hadn't even noticed because I guess, but I spent a lot of time listening, I think, because that was kind of my mode as a learner in that class. I loved that we were not presumed to be or put on the spot to become experts of anything. We spent time, like Mariah said, we read a lot of Gullah Geechee writing by Gullah Geechee folks. We also read, I think we watched a movie. Oh, we watched Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. We we watched Wilmington on Fire, which was awesome, and got to speak with the director. But we had some pieces too where it's like, this was not from a Gullah Geechee perspective, and so we would watch it, and then the next whatever day we would come to class, Queen Quet or whoever you had invited would kind of come in and be like, okay, here's the real story. Like, you just read this thing, you just watched this thing, and it interpreted Gullah Geechee culture wrong. And it was always interesting for me because I would do the reading or watch what I was watching without really knowing what the real story was. So it was as if I was just any other regular person consuming the knowledge, the media that's put out there. And I would just sit with it and be like, well, I guess I'll find out in class, what if that was true? And anyway, I think for me, the collaboration has been a lot of deconstructing the ways that we're really taught to be academics. Like Kate and Queen were both saying, not interpreting. Like, we really didn't interpret. We were instructed, like, this is what's going to be useful for the Gullah Geechee Nation. And we used our skill sets to create a story map. And I mean, our skill sets, both as our knowledge skill sets and our technical skill sets, to be able to do that. Something else I just want to uplift is how meaningful it was to learning Gullah Geechee history, and not just history, but contemporary stories. I think for me, so I'm of African American and European American ancestry. And I think for me, I started to be able to make a lot of connections where there's so many places where African American history is Gullah Geechee history. And there's so much that, like, for me, growing up in a middle class, mostly white neighborhood, going to like elite universities, the kind of the trajectory of my life, there's just so much that's not taught. about African-American history and what Mariah said about agency, it's just so many narratives where we are made to be powerless and oppressed over and over. And even the stories where it's, you know, there's successes in the civil rights movement or, you know, other stories, it's usually like, you know, one specific leader or whatever. And then they're like, there was a success, but then they failed again. And I think the class for me really helped to shift that narrative and to show all the ways that rebellion, resistance, you know, creating culture, holding on to traditions, and showing agency has been a part of the Black narrative from the very beginning. And the only reason why we don't think it's that way is because we're like being brainwashed and we're not supposed to think it's that way. So yeah, so for me, it's also been an opportunity to kind of reflect on my own history and gain like newfound interest in, I've been really interested in genealogy for years now, but I'm actually doing this now that I got funded for an NSF fellowship, which we were talking about before people joined, to do some like oral history and family history, where I'm going to be able to spend time just talking to my family to explore, like, I want to learn what our narrative is. I want to know why we migrated from one place to another. And I really want to know what our ecological relationships are with places. That's something else that for me, I think as a Black scholar in environmental sciences, there's not a lot of narratives that show that, yeah, Black folks have a connection to the environment. And I think that's something I'm really interested in renewing, and just seeing how genuine and like, I don't even know the right word. Yeah, I guess just learning about Gullah Geechee culture and some of what I've learned, like Queen Quet saying, you know, the land is our family and the waterways are our bloodlines. There's just so many ways where the connections are just so clear. And yeah, so it's been very meaningful for me personally, and certainly changes the way I'm able to think about scholarship and think about resourcing communities, like Dr. Derickson said, rather than going out and just pursuing knowledge and assuming that if we produce this knowledge, it'll create change. Like really being so mindful about what is the community asking for, what is going to empower them, and then how can we combine those needs. So yeah, I'll stop there, but thank you.
Excellent. So see, we didn't get a chance to share any virtual gumbo in the class, but when Hannah Jo just said that, combining these things. So Moriah, Dr. Derickson, come on back on the porch so we can see who in the yard now, because we gonna see what else they gonna put up in we pot after they done Yeti wall. We don't see it this afternoon. So this is a good thing. When we here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, people love to eat seafood. They love rice. They love good things. We grow straight out the field, nice and fresh. So if y'all wonder about why Dr. Derickson really keeps coming back, that's a little bit of it too, because we make sure she well fed while she here in the field. And so definitely that's part of it. Nobody wants the wrong ingredients thrown in the pot. You're going to get yourself put out. You put the wrong ingredients in the pot. And so that's part of getting into that circle, is then what are we feeding on in that circle? Spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, communally. And so it is so good to have community with folks and to find out that having that space, having them sit in the circle actually expands the circle. Not that it keeps depleting because they can't take the heat, they're too close to the fire. No, but they only spread out to let someone else sit also, to be a part of it, to be able to be nurtured and to be nourished from what my community has to share. And so we want to have that opportunity now. If there's anything, I didn't see anything yet in the Q&A box. I did see a few things in the chat where someone mentioned that y'all been up there to try to do this year with some stamping, sticking thing at University of MN. Y'all invite me to that shouting session. I won't know who would do that. Okay, I definitely want to know who's doing that. Robert had dropped that in there and was saying he was so happy to be here with us today to learn more about Gullah Geechee. But if y'all have questions, please drop them in the Q&A so that we can definitely cover those. But I'm going to go ahead and get started then with a few questions of my own, because one of the things that Dr. Derickson and I have talked about for years on end is the look on people's faces when she uses the word resourcing. They pause. And there are other academics, she follows it with the community. They go, kind of like the little RCA dog. Like, how you do that? So Dr. Derickson, I'm sure we have some people that when you said that even today, resource in the community, and Hannah Jo said, yes, this has informed her now. As someone who wants to continue to co-produce knowledge, but wants to do it in a way that can resource community. And I know Moriah talked about that from the beginning, how when you resource community, you assist with their agency. And many times that helps with the resistance. That helps. And that is a rebellion in academia many times. And so I would love to know, and I'm sure the audience does too, when you come up with this term or state this term, resourcefulness, how did you come to that? And what makes you continue to stick with it? Because just because you start something doesn't mean you continue. So what made you start to do that with community instead of just for yourself? Because we know academics can get a lot of grant money. That don't mean they share it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think you're right that oftentimes Queen Quet and I go to, regional climate change and environmental conferences and talk about sustainability and collaboration in that realm. And people do get surprised by some of the ways that I talk about, not just collaborating with communities, but using those collaborations to resource communities, and specifically in terms of dollars transferred. So I've talked about and thought about resourcefulness in a variety of different ways. And the original motivation for that, what is kind of a clunky word or a clunky way of phrasing it, comes out of some work that I was doing with a community that I was working with in Govan, Glasgow, when we were talking about this idea of resilience. And this was 10 or 11 years ago, where resilience was kind of the hot new term. And of course, everybody wants communities to be resilient. People want kids to be resilient. We want to be resilient. I don't have a problem with the idea of resilience. Right. But I started thinking about how if resilience is your horizon, you're not changing anything, you're just enduring it. And so I started thinking, just in the case of this one community partner, is that what you're after? Is like enduring these changes? It sounds to me like what you're after is self-determination. Right. And so can we move the political horizon from being resilient to social and economic change to environmental change, and think more about how this work that we're doing can resource self-determination of this community. And so then I started thinking, well, okay, what does it look like? And we started talking about what would it look like to do that. And then I got really interested in, as an academic, what is my role in relationship to resourcing communities toward self-determination? And I started thinking about, okay, well, what do I have in relation to this institution? And, that changes a lot over time. It was certainly different when I was a graduate student than when I was a postdoc, than when I was an untenured professor, and as a tenured professor. It's changed a lot over time, the different kinds of resources that I've had access to, the different ways that my research questions and my framings could contribute, the different service loads and positions that I've had have changed what those resources are. But I'm always trying to think about, how are resources, both material resources and, like, maybe I could think more about this before I say it, but epistemic resources is something maybe I want to think about. But by material resources, I mean, like, when you write your grant proposal, do you have like 3 months of summer salary for yourself in there and $10 gift cards for your participants?
Right. The so-called subjects.
Your subjects, exactly. Right. Do you have $10 gift cards for your subjects and a whole mess of money for yourself? Or can you hire, people from the community to be research associates and collaborators? Can you hire folks to cook and prepare food for your research meetings? And can you just think about how you can make that money that Governor Aiken invested in this university flow back to the place where it was originally made, and really push your institution. It's not easy. I think the reason why you get that like head to the side look, or we get that head to the side look, is because there are, we were talking before about administrative, I forget what the phrase was Jennifer used, but it was a good one, administrative injustices or something like that.
Yeah.
And the really kind of like individualistic, punitive, skeptical, categorically kind of way of accounting for money that the university defaults to is antithetical to collaboration. It's antithetical to community engagement. It's impossible to navigate. So it's work. It's a ton of work. But I think that like what I found is that not only does it clarify my role as an academic to say like, okay, my job is to remove the friction between the vast resources that this university has and the communities that I want to be in solidarity with. But yeah, it also gets me to think more expansively about what are these resources. So it's money, of course, but it's also what kinds of programming do we do? Who do we invite, and what's the programming for? How do we identify our research questions? What projects do our students work on? How do we hold relationships so that our students can move through their programs and their classes in the understandably fractured kind of way? Every student I work with GullahGeechee folks says to me, I'm very worried about the fact that like, I'm only in this class for a semester, or I'm only, doing this project one time. And, I'm fortunate to be able to say, but I hold this relationship and I'm going to make sure that this, the work that you do is part of a broader stream that we've established to create these kind of resource flows. And then I guess the last thing I'll say about it is like, I think it's about sharing in the privileges and I don't know how exactly to say this, but it's not being attached to being an expert. I think when we're at those climate change conferences, I understand that people feel a deep sense of urgency around scientific expertise, and they feel very attached to that often in those spaces. And when I'm encouraging them to take a diminished role for their expertise and let other voices bubble up, I think that they feel a well-meaning threat to kind of scientific knowledge. But I think we have but that's not what we mean. We have at least two amazing scientists that we're often on the road with. A woman named Kate Sell, who she herself would say she's a social scientist.
Kate always says, she's a social scientist, not
but
a
she represents
the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Exactly. And then Dan, whose last name?
Rizzo of Climate Central.
Yes.
Dan Rizzo of Climate Central. Yes.
And so they're doing amazing scientific research about environmental change. And I think that the GullahGeechee Sustainability Think Tank is a really wonderful model for how you can both retain your expertise as a scientist in climatological processes or processes of environmental change that don't require you to be an expert in GullahGeechees. You can be an expert in how to work collaboratively, and you can use that knowledge to bring GullahGeechees, make knowledge that's useful for GullahGeechee decision making. And so I think resourcefulness is also about that, is about kind of expanding that you're thinking about expertise.
Absolutely. And then when you mention Climate Central, it's also about the fact that you may be at an institution, you may be at a company that has technological resources that cost hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars to actually assemble. So that's not something everybody's going to have at their literal fingertips, but because you are there, you can co-produce, you can collaborate with the community and have us be able to feed in what the questions are that we want the answers to. And that has been a critical aspect of working with Climate Central and Union of Concerned Scientists. They want to know literally from us on the front shoreline, as I call it, what is it that is impacting us, and in what ways do we use our, as people call it, traditional knowledge, or to now effect change in a positive way, to, as one would say, push back against the negative things that have been bringing negative impacts to us because we were here and these other things came upon us. Policies came upon us. Overbuilding came upon us. Other people's cultural communities came upon us. Bridges came upon us as far as the sea islands go. And those bridges have been mechanisms of displacement as well. And now we're finding that the same things I'm mentioning are also those contributing factors to what we call climate change. So what climate actions can be taken, what policy actions can be taken, and how do we center the Gullah Geechee Nation in those things? How do we center Black and Indigenous knowledge in those things? So that's where we are right now, even with all of what's going on the Hill. You know, we are still sending word from what they call the Low Country in the Gullah Geechee Nation to say, make sure these policies are inclusive of us, and not just in terminology like underserved and underrepresented, but truly from the knowledge base that we have, and from our rights, from the standpoint of our very land rights, our human rights, that these things need to be incorporated in the policies going forward so that the economy of those policies flow back down the hill, back to these shores, because more often than not, it doesn't. It stays within the hands of those that are in those positions and seats of power. We have the agency to do that. We have the cultural capital that we have to invest in this process now. Not one we'd want to. We'd rather be out on the bateau boat with the cast net getting some shrimp and things like that to bring back in and have some shrimp and gravy rather than dealing with that. But we realize if we don't do that, we might not exist. And as our Minister of Information, Elder Colleytown, always says, if you don't have a seat at the table, you will be on the menu. And so it's been a good thing to be seated at the table with scientists and with those who work with scientists, because in some ways it tends to validate what the natives have said, right? And so when they see that shared respect, that shared, as I like to say, overstanding amongst us, it gives people another model that they hadn't seen. Now I'm being asked, how did y'all do that? How do you do that? Because of these so-called Jedi discussions and conversations. And so Molly asked about climate change and where there were some good examples of how we speak about it. Well, Molly, I have a few resources for you. If you go to GullahGeecheeNassauCounty, GullahGeecheeNassauCounty, GullahGeecheeNassauCounty.tv, type in Queen Quet climate change, and there'll be a lot of things there. Also, the WEBE Gullah Geechee book that I showed you earlier, we have different things that we've talked about in regard to our food security. The same thing that Dr. Derickson brought up about papers that were done regarding the fish and the fish stock here, and looking at that even from a medical perspective. We worked with MUSC folks on that, but also the environmental perspective. We have things in there about environmental justice, as well as just when it's just us here in this environment and how we want to stay. So I think that those will give you a lot of resources, and then you can just go even and spend a lot of time on Google. If you put in Queen Quet and climate change, there are a lot of stories that will give you more information on how we speak about that and speak to that and speak the truth to power. Because Grist did a story many years ago that said these descendants of Africans who had been enslaved could teach you a lot about what to do with hurricanes and climate change. And they did a very good article about that. And there have been so many other great ones out there. So those all add to Paula's question. Paula wants to know, can we say more about subtle forms of resistance? So Mariah, you know, you and I had some, one might say, lively discussions during the class, because we always talked about how words can be weapons. And to me, those words, and you know, we believe you speak things into existence. So those weapons can be for rebellion, for you to push back against and fight something that's oppressive. But those words can also be those of empowerment and can be those things that press on to have you resist anyone else oppressing you. So why don't you tell me and tell the audience a little bit about what you see as some subtle forms of resistance, especially as it relates to the Gullah Geechee and the collaboration even in the course?
Sure. Thanks so much for that question, Queen. And I think, is it Paula in the attendees? So I think the most, I think the most central way that I can think about the ways that we thought about resistance in the map making was really our engagements with language. So as you said, really thinking about the power of language and the power of words. And as you said in the opening of our panel discussion today, you started by speaking Gullah Geechee, which has historically been a marginalized language, where Gullah Geechee children were penalized for speaking Gullah Geechee. And so I think the ways, if you're able to, I'm not sure if attendees are currently looking at the map, but please do take a look at it when you get a chance. You'll notice that most of, or not most, but all of the subsections of the map actually are titled in Gullah Geechee. And that was a really intentional choice that we made as a research collaborative to really showcase the language. And also, I think it's important that Gullah Geechee stories and knowledge should be communicated in the Gullah Geechee language first and foremost. And so I think that was a really important consideration that we immediately applied. And even when we started to actually show the map, we had, I think, was it one or two opportunities? I think two opportunities during the course of the semester to actually showcase our work on the map. And we made a lot of choices as collaborators in how we presented the map as well, and whether or not we chose to actually read the Gullah Geechee language, which we didn't as non-native speakers, because there are regularly attempts made by academics in that effort to position ourselves as experts over a subject, right? To attempt to speak Gullah Geechee was something that we knew we didn't want to do. We wanted to protect the efficacy of the language itself. And yeah, I think that was one of the most core components of the map that I remember early in our discussions, that choice.
Absolutely. And I know, just like me, I'm the artivist. So I do my activism through the arts. And I know Hannah Jo, one of the things we even talked about even today, and Mariah, all of us have been talking about when we were in class together, was resistance in the present form. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity as well to respond to Paula's question in terms of subtle forms of resistance, and maybe not so subtle forms of resistance, since you are still within the academic realm, and what you saw as some of those things that continue to inspire you to use resistance as a tool in your life, because it's so easy just to unplug and say somebody else will do it, so why do that, and what would you offer to Paula as well in terms of that?
Yeah, thank you. It's funny because I feel like there's subtle and then there's also not so subtle, like if you're going to speak in front of Congress and testify or something, that's not a subtle form of resistance, right? But also should be uplifted. And there's so many like ongoing land struggles that I know the Gullah Geechee community is fighting for, and fighting for sovereignty and recognition. So there's also non-subtle forms. I think part of what you're alluding to, or part of what I thought of in the framing of that question, was also our really conscious decision to make this a story map, not a history map. to talk in the present tense and the future tense about Gullah Geechee community. I think that's something else that's really common. Scholars love to place, especially Indigenous folks, in the past tense, and that's another way of taking away power and agency. So I think that's another important component of resistance. I will also add, I think I remember working on one section, the arrival to St. Helena,
Yeah.
sort of the early section, and I remember there being like reading through, scholarly articles, different literature, people had different opinions about where, oh my gosh, Ayan,
Our origin point, essentially
Yes.
the origin point of folks coming in, to
yes,
Santa Helena.
right,
Mhm.
where was the origin point? And so we kind of, I think in our, draft of it, we maybe pointed to, we were like, it could be this place or this place. And
Right.
Queen Quet was like, no, we determined the origin point. And I think it was at PD River.
Yes.
And so it was like, okay, well then that's it. Like, we don't need to debate this. And so even just, making sure that the story is representative of the Gullah Geechee story and not opening it up for spaces of debate. I think, for anybody who might have written those papers, if they read our story map, they'll probably be like, what? But like, that's a subtle form of resistance, to be like, this is the story. This is it.
That's what they did. That's what they did. They didn't come ask us. They wrote their stuff and then just became, quote, the experts, right? The authority on the matter. Well, that's not the end all of the matter, because you haven't engaged, you haven't entered that circle of communication, colloquium with the community. And once you do, then you would have more respect for the oral tradition as well as the written tradition. We know that the written tradition is usually steeped in colonialism. And thereby, it was largely written by the oppressors that wrote it, not the people who endured what was going on and who were the ones who resisted at the PD River. So yes, you may have come in and sailed by the island I live on that's now St. Helena Island and named it and said, oh, it's so beautiful. And this is the patron day for this particular saint. So, oh, it's as beautiful as Helena. So we name it Santa Elena. So we named that. But we also know your story says that there was a continued migration of those boats to another place, trying to find a way to survive. You see, and you ended up in that PD River region and the Africans took off fighting. So we know that those are still the earlier stories. And because they contain resistance, they are usually the ones erased. There's an erasure process. When you talk about indigenous people, African people fighting back to hold on to land, to hold on to culture, to crack your teeth like this and thing like that, and hold on to language, then there is always a problem with that. So here it is in the Western world. If you want to continue to dominate, you also need to dominate the narrative. So now it's our turn to say, well, we never told you that. And we weren't there when it was written and published. We weren't the peers doing the review, okay? And we should have been. And so we have to take that into consideration. And so it's interesting because we've been asked about some more detail on practical use of resourcefulness, how to really put this into practice. And I'm happy we've been asked to elaborate more on that, because when Dr. Derickson was talking, she's talking about from the giving end. Let me talk about from the receiving end in this way. We have the entire Gullah Geechee Nation. There are Gullah Geechee businesses here. There are Gullah Geechee restaurants here. There are bed and breakfast, Airbnbs now that some people own that are native Gullah Geechees that people can rent. Well, why not do that instead of renting a villa in a gated area, knowing that a gated area is antithetical to the very existence of Gullah Geechee people? That's a personal choice you make. You can make the decision as to where those funds you receive to do your research or to do your work over a summer period or over a grant period, where that fund is directed. Don't say, well, my grant didn't allow for a line item for me to provide funding for food. That's still, but you have to eat. So you are somehow going to take a portion of what you have and utilize it to eat. Why not eat at a Gullah Geechee owned restaurant? If you are going to ask some of the people to come and do oral history interviews with you, why go to their house? Maybe you want to invite them to lunch or dinner at a Gullah Geechee owned restaurant. Then you feed two birds with one crumb. The person feels like you respect them enough to want to do something that's traditional, to sit, eat with them, and then have a real dialogue, to try to build a relationship so they can get to know who you are, while at the same time supporting a community business. If you are there at the time that other community activities are going on, there might be vendors, there might be farmers markets. These things may not be in a storefront, but they are still part of the economy of that community. Why not go there and spend a few hundred, a few $1,000s if you have it? If you have gotten $30,000 for a summer salary, for instance, I know some of y'all look at me like, when? I ain't get that much, but some of you have. So if you got a $30,000 salary for that summer, why would it hurt you to tithe on that salary? You ain't got to be a Christian to tithe 10%. Okay, you could say, well, I personally am going to ensure I spend 10% of what was coming straight to me with this community, with this living, breathing community. You will be surprised at how much further that will go with that community. It's like when we plant food, we don't plant the entire, I love rutabagas. Out of all the greens, I love rutabagas. We don't get a whole rutabaga already grown and then plant it. A lot of times it starts with a little tiny seed. They're really, really tiny. You have to hold them and you can barely pick up each one. You most times can't. So you drop 2 or 3 in the hole when you plant them. That's what that $3,000 would do in that case. That $3,000 could be the difference between a Native person still holding on to their land by being able to pay their taxes or not. If they hold on to that land, their family still has a place to live. Their family still has a place to farm. Their family still has that waterway down there at the creek where they can go catch the fish to supplement that rice, you see? So, and those rutabagas, all right? And so that's the thing, that it's really not hard to do. It's a matter of personal choice, you see? And so are you choosing to really share that which is yours, not which is the institutions, not which is the grantors? This is now your money. Are you willing to do like the song said, I got 5 on it? Are you willing to put your 5 down so we can get to 20 or not? Because if you're not, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. Maybe you should do what we say here, go study yourself. But don't come to my community to say you study me, you see? And then you're not contributing anything for our continuation. You actually are trying to record our devastation. So you have to now make the decision, which one are you? This word allyship is going around. Which ship are you sailing in? That's your personal choice. And so that's just a practical thing that nobody really has to outline. That's something that can be done. Dr. Derickson, did you want to add something more to that question?
Well, I was just going to say that for me, I always go back to the question of where are my research questions coming from? Why am I asking this? And even in that, having that orientation locked in, it just makes the rest of it, the apparatus behind it, come into relief for me. And you know, it's a muscle that you build up, I think, as a researcher, especially after going through a PhD program that is discipline us, right? So we get disciplined into a particular way of being. And, you know, I had to develop a new muscle, which is to, like, of all the things that I think about when I think about how I design a study, and we see this on the think tank all the time, folks who have all kinds of anxieties, and understandably so, about being recognized as an expert, designing their study in ways that their field will respect, and you know, getting tenure, finishing their PhD, all these kinds of things. But when I just lock in on the question of where do my research questions come from and why do I want to know, then all these other things get a lot simpler about what should I do and how should I comport myself in the field and what am I comfortable asking people. for, and would I feed somebody, you know, would I take someone out to dinner? Well, when we're meeting up, of course I would I go out of my way to meet somebody and be where it makes sense for them, and just kind of really centering the people that I'm working with instead of myself, and my own aspirations. Like I always say to, you know, Queen Quet always laughs because I say, oh, that's not your problem. You know, like, oh, that thing, I'm trying to make that not your problem. And so I really try to make all these things, or, you know, in another conversation that I think Hannah Jo was part of, I talk a lot about like the maintenance work of being an academic. There's all kinds of things we have to do in order to make something like this possible, in order to get funding, in order to get your work published. There's all kinds of stuff that you have to do as an academic. And I try to not overshare or overburden or orient my collaboration to those things. I try to background those things and really think about like, what is the point of this collaboration, and what am I bringing to it? And the rest of it is like I do on my own time or behind the scenes. And sometimes that's even writing. Like people often go to co-authorship a lot as like the primary way to collaborate. And Queen Quet and I have written together a bunch, and I certainly think there's a time and place for co-authorship, but there are also times when it's like, look, I got to just say some things to my discipline, or I got to write something about libraries, or I don't know, you know, I've got to do this like work that just has to get done. And, you know, that's not, I don't want to drag my collaborators down into the process that needs to, you know, the maintenance part of academia. So yeah, just really always thinking about and prioritizing, where do my research questions come from and why do I want to know? I think really helps the rest of it kind of snap into place.
Absolutely. And one of the things I just wanted to snap into place before Jennifer comes on and snaps us all up out the room now, because this has been so wonderful having you all here in the circle, was how our class truly wanted to center the forward part of it, not just the looking back, like Hannah Jo said, not just the his story, not that, but our story, centering that, and then actually doing a call to action to say we're not just co-creating for the sake of a grade. We're not co-creating so we can get our degrees. We're not trying to just say, oh, we got this done. No, they deliberately chose to say, well, how can we tell everybody that sees the story map how they can be an active part of what we've put together? So they made sure that at the bottom of the story map, there's a donation link to be able to contribute to further collaboration, to contribute more to resistance, to continue to go to participate in the Gullah Geechees achieving their self-determination and continuing their self-sufficiency. Unfortunately, that's an economic thing. And so that's what they made sure to put there. And if you go to sthelena.GullahGeecheeNassauCounty.com, you see at the bottom, you see an opportunity there where people can contribute and donate. The other questions about climate change, they're there. What are we doing in that regard? How can you participate? How can you assist in continuing to try to change the tide of how things are flowing right now? And that's what this is all about. So I am so appreciative of the University of Minnesota not feeling like what we had done with WEBE Gullah Geechee as a course was something that wasn't the course that they wanted to continue to take. They wanted to continue to take that course. They wanted to continue to say, well, wait a minute. Well, if they say in that boat, the boat can only fit Queen Quet and Dr. Derickson, well, we need a bigger boat. Then we got a bigger boat. Then here came Mariah and Hannah Jo and everybody else that you see on the story map. They could get in there. Now others said, well, whoa, there ain't room enough for us. It was like, no, because you might capsize the boat. Well, they said, well, let's try to make it a little bigger. So we now have this bigger boat with the IAS family. And we are so happy that you have decided that the course that we're going on, you might find intriguing. You might feel like that tourist that just wants to come with your cell phone and take pictures, but you realize that you have to ask the community first, is that all right? Is that okay? Am I welcome into the boat, and when the boat gets to the landing on the shore, can I also sit with you in the circle so that we can truly have some talks together, that we really can be in a cultural colloquium. And from there, can we build enough relationship that we can come back together and say we've done true collaboration. So I can't wait until the course has been run and we get to the end of this to see exactly what else we'll have to share. Now, I ain't gonna lie to you. If that $750,000 that y'all owe us is on the way, I can give you ACH deposit information today. I am not mad. We will definitely take that return on that investment that was done with my ancestors' blood, sweat, and tears from Jehoshaphat Plantation all the way up there to where you are in the Midwest to keep you all in university. And we hope that this has now been your Gullah Geechee orientation. On behalf of the Gullah Geechee Nation, I just want to say thank you to all the 100 children who joined me here today. And thank you, Moriah. Thank you, Hannah Jo. Thank you, as y'all just call her Keith, Dr. Derickson, for all of this today. Thank you, Jennifer and Abby and everybody there at IAS that's been behind the scenes that made this happen. And we pray that all the rest of this series is also part of the circle. And may we all get here on the shore and collaborate together once more. Peace and blessings. Jennifer, any final words for the family before they grind on wherever them children have to go now on the UMN campus and beyond?
Just thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts, and to all of you, Queen Quet, Hannah Jo, Kate, and Mariah. I think we will all be taking food for thought and nourishment home with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Peace and blessings, everybody. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you so much. This was great.